Welcome back to Kevin Toll Reads. I hope you're doing well. Before we dive into Saturday Shorts, I wanted to remind you all that this evening, do not forget the live stream event I'm going to be doing with Tim at Secret Fire Books. We're going to be talking Gate of Ivral, book number 1 in the Morgaine cycle from C.J. Cherryh. So don't want to miss that. And now, stick around because we're going to be talking about Saturday Shorts. She was the first woman inducted into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame, and she was the first woman to receive the Gandalf Grand Master Award and the SFWA Grand Master Award. Yes, we are talking Alice Mary Norton, born in 1912, passed away in 2005. Alice Norton legally changed her name to Andre to appeal to a male-dominated readership in the early part of her career. Norton described herself as an old-fashioned storyteller, emphasizing on the importance of narrative in her work. And so this week for Saturday Shorts, I read 3 short stories from The Tales from High Halleck, Volume 1 by Andre Norton. I picked these at random, not knowing anything about this. This is my first foray into Andre Norton as an author. And so I have the first short story is titled The Waywind. It was published in 1995 in Sisters in Fantasy Volume 1. The summary of this is we find ourselves in this kingdom out in the West called Les Estelle. And it seems like every season they have this waywind that comes through, this kind of weather phenomenon. But with it, and most importantly, is it brings someone to Les Estelle. It can be a mercenary, it could be a wandering traveler, it could be a merchant, it could be a nobleman, it could be someone lost. And what ends up happening as you're reading this story and learning these things is a lot of the noble people from Les Estelle go down and make wagers on who it'll be. And that's what takes place in this story. In particular, of those noble people, you have Lady Almedis. Her father was once not only king of Les Estelle, but a bigger part of the territory. And yeah, times have been tough, and now he only manages Les Estelle, and it's not the most growing of places. When they make these wagers, none of them expects what walks through into the town with the Waywind, and it is Meg. She is an herb mother, a very young herb mother, and she comes with her horse and her cat to sell her wares, and a lot of people are taken back. What ends up happening is Meg goes to the market and starts selling, but she knows more about the individual people that she's never even met before and what they need in terms of herbs and seeds and flowers, and there's just something off about her. And that is definitely the general consensus of what's taking place. While that's going on, though, Otger comes and wants to once again press upon the king and Lady Almedis that he is right for Lady Almedis to marry. Otger obviously wants to expand his reach and take over Les Estelle. The king, Lady Almedis' father, is in agreement, but Lady Almedis is not. And so it's got a very unique kind of plot and subplot dynamic going on. So what makes it really good? Obviously, the plotting is really good. One of the common themes that are going to be throughout these 3 stories is Norton's writing. It takes a while to get used to. I noticed that. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about the other short stories. But I did get used to it, and I enjoyed it. In particular, in this one, this is the longer of the 3 short stories by quite a ways. I did enjoy it, though, because Norton does a really good job with characters, and that is a consistent thing that I enjoyed throughout the 3 stories as well. She does a really good job, whether they're the main protagonist, whether they're an antagonist, whether they're side characters. She does a really good job. In particular, as an example, in this story, you have Lan Tay and their goat Nid, these 2 ornery young boys that have no parents after something that happened that you don't really get many details. They're kind of given scraps. A lot of the townsfolk don't like them. They're a nuisance. The lady that runs the inn, she lets them stay in the hay barn. But they take a liking to Meg, and Meg reciprocates, and they definitely form a bond and a trust. And it does come into play. Meg's animals, Casca the cat and Moors the pony, are also, even though they don't have lines and they're not really they're not really a focal point of the story, they're always kind of there, and it's really interesting. I don't know if it was intentional by Norton, but it works really, really well. There is an excerpt that I really enjoyed. It was fear and duty often ride comrades, but fear is the shadow and duty the substance. Oh, that was really good. I give this a 4.3. It was a really good introduction. It's my first a reading of anything by Norton, and I really enjoyed it. Her prose is different. It does take a while to get used to. I'll talk about that some more, but I really enjoyed the character work, the setting. It was really dynamic. I really thought I was engrossed. And so let's move on to the next one. So back to some fun facts about Andre Norton. Norton was studying to be a teacher and was going to college for that, and actually had to stop during the Great Depression. She then got a job working for the Cleveland Public Library System and stayed on and worked for the public library in Cleveland for 18 years. She wrote outside of just science fiction and fantasy. She wrote contemporary fiction as well as crime fiction and historical fiction. She also wrote under different pen names. She wrote under Andre Norton, Andrew North, and Alan Weston. Obviously, she tried to get a foothold in different genres that were predominantly read by males, and by changing her name to a male name, it definitely aided her. And so the second story is titled Through the Needle's Eye. This is an interesting one. Even though it's my lowest rated story of the three, it definitely has kind of a special place. And I don't know if that makes sense, but we're going to talk about it. Through the Needle's Eye was published in 1970. It was in a collection titled High Sorcery. Summary of this, you have Ernestine. She's this young girl. She's staying with her cousin and aunt, and she stumbles upon a clothesline where she sees some bright colors and she's interested, and she goes and she actually takes a tumble. And that's kind of when you learn she has a physical deformity with that she had kind of since birth, and she has to wear a brace when she walks. But she ends up meeting a lady by the name of Anne Ruthhaven. And Anne snatches up Ernestine and takes her to her house. Her house is close to where her aunt lives. And so Anne takes her in, and Ernestine learns that Anne is really big into sewing. And she's very, very, very good at it. When after that incident, when she goes back to cousin Althea's house, she learns from her cousin and her aunt that Anne Ruthhaven is very kind of legendary for sewing, but she also has a really tragic backstory about being in love and being really very beautiful at a time, and something happened. And so you get this backstory that definitely makes you pull for as Anne as a character. And yeah, and so little does Ernestine know, but she is going to get an apprenticeship that she didn't really ask for, but definitely something that she needed. She's going to learn some very unique skills, and she's going to be gifted something that of very, very magical value. And so that's really the summary of this. I'm being a little cagey about it, but let's talk about what makes it a good short story. Okay, I really enjoyed the backstory of Anne, and I think that really kind of set the tone. And I don't think if that would have been as early in the story, that my enjoyment wouldn't have been as good. Even though this is my lowest rated story, I was kind of a little bored at the beginning of this story. It was about sewing. You had a bunch of ladies, which is going to be definitely a consistent theme throughout Andre Norton's writing, and that's okay. But I mean, it's sewing. I mean, I just read The Executioner, we're talking about sewing, but it definitely got my attention, and I ended up liking it. I was actually surprised. the lady's talking about lost love and this backstory. The characters and the mysteriousness, the supernatural kind of touches that are there. It definitely kept me engaged. It heavily reminded me of one of these softer kind of fantastical stories or fantasy stories that you get from like a Neil Gaiman. This is my second story from Norton, obviously, and I really started to kind of get into a groove with her prose. As I mentioned in the first short story review, that it was a little tough to get used to. Her sentence structure, for me at least, kind of seemed like each sentence was just like a half a breath too much and too many words. Like she wanted to add just a little more of a thought in there that needed to be. But after you kind of get used to it, you don't really notice it. In terms of excerpts, this one had one as well. It was, I have paid for what I want most with 50 years of labor. Now the end is in sight. And that's a pretty profound one, especially if you read the story, you'll know what I mean. I gave this one a 3.9. Not terrible. It's definitely not as good as the other two, but again, it's a story about sewing that's really more about the characters, but it's about sewing, and I kind of enjoyed it. I mean, it was pretty decent. So who would have thought? And now on to the last short story. Norton is often referred to as the dame, the grand dame of science fiction and fantasy. In her career, especially early in her career, Norton recognized that there was a fundamental lack of dedicated resources for genre fiction writers. And so to combat this, she established High Halleck, which was a writer's retreat and research library in Tennessee, which housed a huge collection of materials and diverse subjects relevant to genre writing. Andre Norton was groundbreaking and influential as an author with a career spanning over 70 years, more than 300 published titles. If you get the chance to research her, I heavily suggest you do, even if it's just going on Wikipedia. She had quite the life. And I say that out of a place of admiration because there was a lot of things that she did that didn't pan out. She was going to college to be a teacher. She had the Great Depression. She started a business that failed. But she kept at it, and she was very, just never going to give up. And I admire that a lot, whether it's a man or a woman. But yeah, it is incredible, especially for a woman, especially writing in this time period that had to use pen names as a man to make her way in that genre and then get all these accolades. It's pretty impressive. So the third story is titled The Toy Maker's Snuff Box. This was an interesting one. The title alone, again, I picked these at random out of the collection. I went to the contents and just picked them. This was published in 1966 in Golden Magazine. The title alone caught my eye, and yeah, snuff box. It's going to be about tobacco or chew or something. And it was and it wasn't. But let's get into the summary. So we're in the city of Kammerstad, and there lives this legendary toy maker named Master Franz. And when one night in his shop he hears this noise, he thinks he's dreaming, but he goes to check it out, and he finds this very tiny elf, about the size of your hand, in one of his finer beds, crying. And so he goes to this elf, and she lets him know, like, hey, I no longer have hair, and there's this ball tonight that I need to go to. And Master Franz is like, okay, don't worry, I have plenty of wigs. We'll fix you up. And he does. And he remarks that it's some of his finest work ever. And in doing so, the elf, which we never get her name, grants him a wish. And Master Franz, who is this legendary toy maker who makes toys, and people come from all over to meet and have him produce toys for their children for different events, birthdays, Christmases. He has everything he needs, and he explains that to her. But she says, never mind, I will grant you, I will make your wish decision for you. And she does, and she takes off for the ball. And Master Franz is kind of taken back, and he's like, I definitely am dreaming. I think I need to go to bed. So he does. When he wakes up the next morning, however, he goes into his shop, and he finds this little golden snuff box. And he doesn't think nothing of it because he's not into tobacco or anything, so he puts it away. Well, as he goes upon his days, the town, the country goes into a war, and he gets pulled away from his toy making duties to go to war, and it decimates a lot of the businesses. When he comes back, there's nothing left of his toys, his tools, or anything, but the snuff box is still there. So he takes that and he makes his way trying to go out and find a town where he can learn, he can get established and use his skills with his hands to find a decent life. And that's kind of the premise of this. But what he runs into in terms of obstacles and challenges and magical beings is very interesting. And so what makes it a good short story? It's just such a really good story. It's not something that's very new. Like this kind of story setting is probably have been used multiple times, but Norton does a really good job with it. You definitely pull. There's just enough mystery and whimsical elements, again, that it reminds you of Gaiman heavily. I also liked it because I think being the third short story I read, I was definitely in on Norton's writing style, and I was really, really enjoying it. It really is a masterclass in storytelling for me because it just felt so natural. I flew through it, but enjoyed it heavily. I found myself rereading different parts just because I enjoyed that. Franz comes upon a place he knows, or at least at first thinks, is going to be the place where he can finally settle down, and it's not. And that kind of twist was interesting, but there is a bigger and broader twist to it that dovetails back to the snuff box and is done really, really well. I really like that. This of the three also had one of the better endings, I thought. I thought it was really, really well done. I don't have any specific excerpts from this one, but I did give a rating of 4.6 to this thing. It is really good. I really enjoyed it. In terms of overall, when we're talking about these short stories this week, again, there's a whimsical feel to all these. It's very reminiscent of Neil Gaiman. I enjoy, and I'm not trying to say that with all the things going on with Gaiman, I'm not trying to typecast her in that same regard, but from just writing perspective, it definitely reminds me of that. I enjoy her characters really, really, really much so. They were really well done. It's not overdone, but it's done enough that you just really enjoy them. I think her prose, even though it's a tad obtuse at first, I really kind of eased in and found my way, and I really enjoyed it. Now, I've had other authors that I've come to really enjoy that have been of the same kind of mold, and I like that. It didn't really turn me away, and once I got into it, I enjoyed it. I'm definitely interested in Witch World, which is her kind of magnum opus, so definitely I'm going to plan to read those books down the road. In terms of would you like Norton, I think if you like great pacing, adventure, if you like world building, strong settings, accessibility, engagement, strong protagonists, especially females, and just solid storytelling, she's for you, for sure. If you don't, however, or if you don't like something that can be like dated, or, something that's more typically labeled as YA. I don't think it's YA, but I definitely read and researched that a lot of her stories are typically labeled as YA. Her science fiction tends to be more fantastical versus technical or scientific. If those type of things will turn you away, then maybe she's not for you. But if you want a good story, if you want great characters, if you want great prose and world building, she's definitely in your wheelhouse. And my friends, that is Saturday Shorts. I am super excited to read more from Andre Norton. All I need for you all to do is figure out how to provide more hours in the day so I can get to all of these wonderful authors. And I hope you're having a great day. And don't forget, if you stuck around later this evening, I will be talking Gate of Ivral by C.J. Cherry with Tim at Secret Fire Books. I hope to see you there, and have a great day. Thanks.